He took everything. In the end, what she discovered in the one place he forgot would change not just her future, but the entire story of her past. If you've ever felt like you've been completely erased by someone else's story, I need you to stick around for this one. Hit that subscribe button because we're going to talk about what it means to find yourself in the wreckage. The last box was a liar. It was a medium-sized cardboard cube, sagging in the middle, sealed with a strip of cheap packing tape that was already peeling at the corners. On the side, in my own handwriting, it said, Kitchemisk. That was the lie. It wasn't miscellaneous. It was the junk drawer. The drawer of broken things, of forgotten things, of things that had no other place to go. A dead flashlight, a handful of rubber bands brittle with age, a single earring whose partner had vanished years ago, 3 dried-up pens, a book of matches from a restaurant we went to on our second anniversary. It was the archaeological record of a life that was now officially extinct. I taped it shut, the screech of the tape gun a final, ugly sound in the echoing emptiness of the apartment. Mark's apartment now. The thought landed with a dull thud, no longer sharp enough to hurt, just heavy. For 2 years, this had been our home. Now, it was just a collection of clean, white walls and pale gray floors, stripped of personality. Stripped of me. His lawyer had used the word dissolution, which sounded so clean, so chemical, like 2 things neatly separating in a beaker. It wasn't like that. It was like an amputation. He was the body, and I was the limb that had been severed and discarded. The phantom pains were constant. I'd walk toward the kitchen for a glass of water, and for a split second forget the glasses weren't mine anymore. I'd see his shadow in the corner of my eye, and think it was him coming home from work, my stomach clenching in that old, familiar knot of anticipation and anxiety. Will he be in a good mood? Will he be in a bad mood? It was a relief, I told myself, not to have to ask that question anymore. But the body remembers its posture of bracing for impact long after the threat is gone. He got the apartment. He got the car. He got the savings account, which he'd successfully argued was built from his premarital assets. He got the furniture, the art, the friends. I got my student loan debt, a suitcase full of clothes, and this last pathetic box of junk. My lawyer, a tired-looking public defender named Ms. Albright, who seemed to run on lukewarm coffee and sheer force of will, had told me it was the best we could do. He has the resources, Clara, she'd said, her voice gentle but firm. His father's lawyers are sharks. We don't have the money or the time to fight them on every little thing. Let's just get you out, clean. I felt anything but. I felt stained, used up, erased. The final indignity was the mail. It was supposed to be forwarded, but a few stragglers always got through. I was doing a final sweep of the counters when I saw it. A single, official-looking window envelope addressed to Clara Miller. My maiden name. I hadn't used that name in 4 years. It felt like a ghost name. It was from a tax assessor's office in Callaway County. I didn't live in Callaway County. I hadn't set foot there in almost 6 years, not since my father's funeral. I almost threw it away, thinking it was a mistake, some piece of bureaucratic junk mail sent to the wrong person. But my name was right there, spelled correctly. Curiosity, or maybe just the sheer, exhausted emptiness of the moment, made me tear it open. It was a delinquency notice, a final warning for unpaid property taxes on a parcel of land. Parcel number 08-4B112. Amount due, $43,217. It threatened liens, foreclosure, public auction. I stared at the paper, my mind a complete blank. I didn't own any property. My father had lost the family farm when I was a teenager, a long, slow, heartbreaking collapse under the weight of debt and a changing world. That was the central tragedy of my young life, the thing that had sent us from the open fields and dusty roads of the country into a cramped rental in the suburbs. The loss of that land had broken him, and in many ways, it had broken me too. It was the reason I'd been so drawn to Mark, to his promises of stability, of a life where the foundation wouldn't just crumble away beneath your feet. Another lie. I sank down onto the floor, the box of junk beside me, the stark white envelope in my hand feeling like a relic from another dimension. It had to be a mistake, a clerical error. Yet, There was a strange, specific detail on the form under property description. 075 acres. Unimproved. Includes dilapidated structure. Wagon shed. Wagon shed. The words unlocked a memory, so distant it felt like a dream. A small, graying wooden building at the far edge of my father's old property, where the north pasture met the woods. It was where he kept old tools, rusted parts for a tractor he no longer owned, and junk he couldn't bring himself to throw away. It was his version of my junk drawer. Why would this be in my name? Why would this one tiny piece of a lost world still exist? I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling as I looked up Ms. Albright's number. It was after 5, but I knew she often worked late. She answered on the third ring. Her voice is weary, as I remembered. Albright, Ms. Albright, it's Clara Miller. I'm so sorry to bother you after hours. Clara, is everything all right? Did he try to contact you? There was a sudden sharpness in her tone, a flicker of the protector beneath the tired professional. No, nothing like that. I'm out. The apartment is empty. I'm just leaving now. Good, she said, the relief audible. So what's wrong? I tried to explain the letter, the parcel number, the wagon shed. I could hear her typing on her computer as I spoke, the rhythmic clicking a counterpoint to my confused rambling. Callaway County, you said? Miller. Not your married name? Yes. That's what's so strange. Hold on, she said. There was a long silence, filled only with more clicking. I imagined her in her cluttered office, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, surrounded by the sad stories of 100 other lives packed into manila folders. Okay, I'm in the county registrar's database. 08-4B 112. Well, I'll be. What is it? I asked, my heart starting to beat a little faster. It's a quitclaim deed. Filed 11 years ago. Your father, Daniel Miller, transferred ownership of that specific 3/4-acre parcel to you, Clara Miller. You were the sole grantee. He filed it a week after your 18th birthday. 11 years ago. I was a freshman in college, overwhelmed and thrilled to be away from home, from the heavy blanket of sadness that had smothered our little rental house since we had lost the farm. I barely spoke to my dad that year. I felt guilty about it now, a deep, aching guilt. He must have called, but I was always running to a class, or to a party, or to a study group. He never mentioned it. Not once. But the rest of the farm was foreclosed on, I said, my voice barely a whisper. How could he keep this one piece? It looks like he partitioned it off legally years before the foreclosure, Ms. Albright explained, her voice losing some of its weariness, replaced by a note of professional curiosity. He sold the main acreage to the bank to settle the debt, but this little piece was already a separate legal entity. And since he'd already transferred it to you, it wasn't his asset to lose. It was yours. Her next words hit me like a physical blow. And because it was deeded to you before your marriage, and Mark was never added to the title, it was never marital property. It's yours, Clara. Free and clear. Well, except for the back taxes. Mine. A word I hadn't been able to apply to anything of value in months. I own a piece of dirt, a piece of the home I had lost. Why didn't this come up in the divorce? I asked. His lawyers looked for everything. My guess. They searched for assets under your married name. They probably ran a check under Miller too, but were looking for bank accounts, stocks, things of value. A 075-acre parcel of unimproved land with a dilapidated structure in the middle of nowhere. Its assessed value is probably less than $1,000. It flew under the radar. It's legally worthless, which is why it's still yours. Legally worthless. The phrase echoed in the empty room. Maybe that's why it felt so perfect. A worthless girl and her worthless piece of land. Clara, are you still there? Yes, I said, my voice thick. I'm here. What do I do? Pay the taxes if you can, she said practically. It's not much, all things considered. It'll keep the county from selling it out from under you. After that, I don't know. It's your land. My land. I stood up, looking around the pristine, empty apartment that held nothing of me anymore. Then I looked down at the box of junk at my feet. My father's wagon shed. His junk drawer. Maybe I thought it was the only place left in the world I truly belonged. The bus ride felt like traveling backward in time. With every mile that clicked away on the highway, the city's sharp angles and concrete canyons softened, melting into the rolling hills and dense green forests of my childhood. I watched the landscape change through the smudged window, my reflection a pale ghost superimposed over the passing trees. I had just enough money for the one-way ticket and to keep my cheap motel room for 2 nights. After that, I had no plan. It was the most terrifying and, in a strange way, the most liberating feeling I'd had in years. For my entire life with Mark, every day had been planned, scheduled, and optimized. His life, his schedule, his plan. My role was to be a supporting character, to make sure the scenery was arranged to his liking. Now the script was gone. The stage was empty. The bus pulled into Callaway's town square just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long, golden shadows across the brick storefronts. The town looked smaller than I remembered and shabbier. A few shops on the main street were boarded up, their windows dusty and blind. But the old courthouse still stood in the center of the square, its white clock tower resolute against the darkening sky. It smelled the same, that unique country smell of damp earth, cut grass, and the faint, sweet scent of livestock from the farms on the edge of town. It was the smell of home, a place I had tried so hard to forget. I spent the first night in a motel room that smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner. I lay awake for hours, staring at the water-stained ceiling, the tax notice on the bedside table. My land. The phrase felt foreign, impossible. The next morning, I paid the back taxes at the county clerk's office in the courthouse. The woman behind the counter was heavy-set with a cloud of gray hair and a surprisingly warm smile. She took my crumpled cash and stamped my receipt with a loud, satisfying thud. Parcel 08-4B. 112 is all paid up? Honey, she said, handing me the paper. You're good for the year. It felt like a lifetime. I didn't have a car, so I found the town's only taxi service, an old sedan driven by a man named Earl who looked like he'd been driving it since it was new. He recognized my name. Miller? You one of Dan Miller's girls? Just one, I said. Clara. I'll be, he said, looking at me in the rearview mirror. Haven't seen you around here in ages. Shame about your dad. He was a good man. Quiet, but a good man. He knew the place. I didn't even have to give him directions. The old wagon, shed at the edge of the north pasture? Sure. Haven't been down that service road in a decade. Might be a bit rough. It was more than rough. The gravel road that led from a main highway back to the property was almost completely overgrown. Tree branches scraped against the sides of the car, and the tires spun in muddy patches left over from a recent rain. After a few hundred yards, Earl stopped. This is as far as I can get, he said, gesturing to a massive fallen oak tree blocking the path. You'll have to walk the rest of the way. It's another quarter mile, maybe. I paid him and got out. The air was thick with the smell of wet leaves and pine. The silence was absolute, broken only by the buzz of insects and the rustle of wind in the trees. It was a silence I hadn't heard in years, a deep, living quiet that the city never had. I ducked under the fallen tree and started walking. The road was more of a suggestion now, 2 faint tracks disappearing into a tunnel of green. And then I saw it. Through a break in the trees, the shed stood in a small clearing, exactly as I remembered it, only more so. More weathered, more tired, more a part of the landscape. The gray wood of its walls had darkened to a deep, almost black color. The tin roof was rusted in patches, and one of the 2 large front doors hung crookedly from a single hinge. The grass around it was waist-high, dotted with wildflowers. It looked less like a building and more like a shipwreck, a vessel that had washed ashore here a long time ago and been slowly claimed by the land. My heart was pounding in my chest as I pushed my way through the tall grass. It felt like trespassing, even though the stamped receipt in my pocket said this place was mine. The crooked door was stuck fast, swollen shut by years of damp. I put my shoulder into it and pushed, grunting with the effort. It wouldn't budge. I walked around the side, looking for another way in. A small, square window was boarded up, the wood of the boards soft with rot. I found a heavy rock and, after a few clumsy strikes, managed to break the rotting wood away. The hole was just big enough for me to squeeze through. Inside, the shed was dark and cool. Shafts of dusty light cut through gaps in the roof, illuminating a scene of quiet chaos. It was exactly as I'd pictured it, a museum of my father's life. Old tools hung from nails on the walls, their metal surfaces coated in a fine layer of rust. A heavy wooden workbench stood against the far wall, covered in coffee cans full of nuts and bolts, tangled lengths of wire, and strange, half-finished projects I couldn't identify. In one corner, a stack of old tires leaned against the wall like a collapsed spine. The air was thick with the smell of old oil, sawdust, and dry, decaying wood. It was the smell of him. I ran my hand along the workbench, my fingers leaving a clean streak in the thick dust. This was his sanctuary, his place of retreat. When the farm was failing, when my mother was sick, when the world was too loud, he would come out here. I never understood what he did for hours on end. Now, I felt like I was standing in the middle of his heart. I spent the rest of the afternoon just exploring, touching things, remembering. Here was the old hand-crank seed spreader we used for the vegetable garden. Here was the battered metal cooler he always took fishing. Here, hanging from a peg, was his old canvas work jacket, the elbows worn through. I buried my face in it, and for a second, I could almost smell the faint scent of him, of sweat and soil and cheap soap. A wave of grief, so powerful it buckled my knees, washed over me. I sank to the dusty floor and cried. I cried for him, for the quiet, steady man I had never fully understood. I cried for the years I had wasted with Mark, trying to build a life on a foundation of lies. And I cried for myself, for the lost, lonely girl who had finally, in the most unexpected way, found her way home. It's funny, isn't it? How a place can hold an emotion. Have you ever walked into a room and just felt the history of it, the sadness or the joy that happened there? This shed, for me, was soaked in a kind of gentle melancholy, a quiet strength. If you've ever found a place like that, a place that feels more like a part of you than just a location, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Your stories matter here. They're part of what makes this community so special. We're all just trying to find our own wagon sheds, I think. A place to put the things that are too important to throw away. As the light began to fade, my eyes adjusted to the gloom. I was sitting on the floor, leaning against the workbench when my foot knocked against something. It was a loose floorboard. Not just a little loose, but clearly cut and set back in a place. My curiosity, which had been dormant under a heavy layer of grief, sparked back to life. I pried at the edge of the board with my fingers. It was heavy, but it lifted easily. Beneath, it was a dark, square hole. And in that hole, nestled in a bed of what looked like old dry straw, was a metal box. It was an old army surplus ammunition can, painted olive drab, with a heavy latch on the front. It was cool to the touch and heavy. Far heavier than an empty box should be. My breath caught in my throat. This was not random junk. This was placed here, hidden. I lifted the box out of the hole and set it on the workbench, the metal scraping against the wood. The latch was stiff, but I managed to pry it open with the blade of an old screwdriver. The lid creaked open. Inside, my father had packed a lifetime. The first thing I saw was a stack of envelopes, tied together with a piece of butcher's twine. They were addressed to me in his familiar, blocky handwriting. Clara, just my name. Beneath the letters was a thick, plastic-wrapped bundle. I carefully lifted it out. It was cash, stacks of 20s and 50s, held together with rubber bands that had gone stiff and were starting to crack. I didn't count it, but it looked like a lot. More money than I had seen in one place in my entire life. And under the money, at the very bottom of the box, was a small, velvet-wrapped object. I unwrapped it. It was my grandmother's wedding ring, the one my mother had worn, the one that was supposed to have been sold to pay for her medical bills. He had kept it. He had saved it for me. My hands were shaking. I sat down on an overturned bucket, the box open before me like an altar. This wasn't just a collection of things. This was a plan, a lifeboat, a message sent across time from a man I thought I'd lost completely. I picked up the stack of letters and untied the twine. The top envelope had a date written on the back, June 14th, the day after my 18th birthday. 11 years ago. With trembling fingers, I opened it and began to read. My dearest Clara, the letter began. If you're reading this, it means a few things have happened. It means you found this place. It means I am gone, and it means you are in trouble. I am so sorry for that. A father is supposed to protect his daughter from trouble, not just prepare for it. But some storms you can see coming from a long way off. You can't stop them. All you can do is build a shelter and hope it holds. I had to stop reading, my vision blurred by a fresh wave of tears. I wiped them away with the back of my dusty hand and continued. I have put this piece of land in your name. It's not much, I know. It's the forgotten corner of a world we lost. But it is yours. No one can take it from you. When the bank took the farm, I made sure this little piece was safe. It cost me, but some things are more important than money. This land is your foundation, your anchor. Never let anyone tell you it is worthless. The ground beneath your feet is never worthless. He went on to explain about the money. For years, every time he did a side job, a little bit of cash-only mechanic work or carpentry for a neighbor, he'd skimmed a little off the top and hidden it away. It's not a fortune, he wrote, but I hope it's enough to give you a start. A way to breathe. A way to get out from under whatever weight has been put on you. And then he wrote the line that broke my heart all over again. I saw the way that boy, Mark, looked at you. And I saw the way he looked at what we had. Like it was something to be acquired. Something to be consumed. I tried to warn you in my own clumsy way, but you had stars in your eyes. I understand that. I just hope that when the stars fall, you have a soft place to land. This is your soft place, Clara. He had seen it. All those years ago, he had seen the truth of Mark's character, a truth it had taken me 4 years of marriage and a brutal divorce to finally accept. I had thought my father was just being overprotective, old-fashioned, unable to see the charming, ambitious man I saw. But he hadn't been looking at the surface. He had been looking at the foundations. He knew a rotten structure when he saw one. I felt a surge of shame, so hot and sharp it made me gasp. I had dismissed him. I had ignored his quiet warnings. I had chosen the shiny, polished lie over the plain, sturdy truth he represented. And all that time, he wasn't judging me. He was preparing for my rescue. There were other letters, one for each year. I didn't read them all at once. It was too much. I sat there in the fading light of the shed, the dusty air growing cool around me, and I held the first letter to my chest. The world outside this little wooden box, the debts, the divorce, the crushing sense of failure, it all seemed to recede. It was still there, waiting for me, but it had lost its power. In its place was a profound, aching sense of being loved. Not in a loud or showy way, but in a quiet, practical, steadfast way. The way my father had been. He hadn't left me with words of wisdom or grand pronouncements. He had left me with a piece of earth, a small pile of money, and a place to hide. He had left me a chance. The next morning, I walked back into town. I felt different, taller. The slump in my shoulders that had become my permanent posture over the last year was gone. I bought a cheap pay-as-you-go phone at the dollar store, a sleeping bag, a lantern, and a large thermos. I filled the thermos with coffee at the town diner and bought a bag of donuts. The woman behind the counter, whose name tag read Brenda, gave me a curious look. "You staying out at the old Miller place?" she asked. News traveled fast in a town like Callaway. "Something like that," I said. She nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "Your dad used to come in here for coffee every morning. Black, 2 sugars. Sat in that booth, right there by the window. He didn't say much, but he was always watching things." She looked me straight in the eye. "He was a good man, your dad." I spent the next week in the shed. It was my whole world. During the day, I worked. I started by just cleaning, sweeping away the years of dust and cobwebs, organizing the chaos of the workbench. I found a nest of mice in the stack of old tires and shooed them out into the field. I used a rusty scythe I found hanging on the wall to cut down the tall grass around the building, creating a small, clear yard. The work was hard, physical, and deeply satisfying. Every muscle in my body ached, but it was a good ache. An ache of creation, not of stress. In the evenings, I would sit by the light of my lantern and read another one of my father's letters. Each one was a snapshot of a year in my life, told from his distant perspective. He wrote about my graduation from college, his pride mixed with a clear-eyed worry about the path I was on. "You look happy in the pictures you sent," he wrote, "but your eyes look a little tired. Remember to rest, Clara. Mark strikes me as a man who runs everyone around him ragged. He wrote about my wedding, an event he had attended with a quiet, stoic reserve that I had mistaken for disapproval. I hope I am wrong about him, the letter from that year read. For your sake, I pray every night that I am the biggest fool in Callaway County and that he is the man you believe him to be. But a father's job is to worry. And I do. So I added a little more to the box this year. Just in case. Reading his words was like having him back, but more so. It was like finally being allowed to see the inner workings of his quiet, steady heart. He had never been a man for emotional speeches, for easy declarations of love. His love was in his actions. It was an oil change he did on my first car, the leaky faucet he fixed in my college apartment, the way he always made sure my tires were properly inflated. And it was here, in this box in this plan, this meticulous, secret, decade-long act of love and protection. The money I'd counted it by now, a little over $17,000. A fortune, not enough to change the world, but enough to change my world. Enough for a foundation. My internal crisis didn't come like a lightning strike. It was a slow, creeping dawn. For days, I'd been living in a bubble, a protected space made of work and memory and grief. But the outside world was still there. I knew that. One afternoon, as I was struggling to rehang the heavy shed door, a sleek black SUV I didn't recognize pulled up to the fallen oak tree at the end of the road. A man in a crisp suit and shiny shoes got out and started walking toward me, picking his way carefully through the muddy patches. He looked deeply out of place, a creature from another ecosystem. "Clara Miller," he called out, his voice smooth and professional. I wiped my sweaty hands on my jeans and nodded, my guard immediately up. "My name is Stephen Hale," he said, handing me a business card. "Hale Development Group," it read. "I represent the consortium that recently purchased the old Bridger Farm, which I believe borders this property to the north and west." "Okay," I said, not offering anything more. "We're in the process of acquiring several of the smaller adjacent parcels to consolidate the tract for a new residential development project," he continued, his eyes scanning the shed with a look of faint disgust. "Our records show you as the owner of this piece. We're prepared to make you a cash offer to take it off your hands, given its condition and the unpaid tax liability." "The taxes are paid," I interrupted, a small thrill of satisfaction running through me. He blinked, momentarily thrown off his script. Well, good. Even so, it's an undeveloped, non-viable lot. We can offer you $5,000. Cash. We'll handle all the paperwork. You can be done with it by the end of the day. $5,000. A week ago, that would have sounded like a winning lottery ticket. It would have been enough to get a security deposit on a small apartment back in the city, to put some distance between me and the wreckage of my old life. It was the easy way out, the sensible option. Sell the worthless land, take the money, and run. Start over somewhere new, somewhere the ghosts weren't. I looked from his polished, expensive shoes to the sagging roof of the shed. I thought of the feel of the worn wood of the workbench under my hands. I thought of my father's blocky handwriting on the envelopes. "Never let anyone tell you it is worthless." "No, thank you," I said. Hale's professional smile tightened. "Perhaps you misunderstood. That's a very generous offer. The county assesses this land at less than 1,000 each. "I understand the offer," I said, my voice clearer and stronger than I thought it would be. "My answer is no. The property is not for sale." He stared at me for a long moment, his brain clearly not computing. He saw a young woman in dirty clothes standing in front of a falling-down shack. He saw an easy target. He didn't see a woman who was standing on her own land, a foundation built for her out of pure, stubborn love. "You're making a mistake, Ms. Miller," he said, his voice turning cold. "That offer won't stand for long. When we start clearing the surrounding land, this little pocket of blight is going to become a real problem. For everyone, it was a threat, wrapped in the language of business." "Then I guess I'll be a problem," I said. He gave me one last look of disbelief, then turned and walked back to his fancy car, his shiny shoes now caked in Callaway County mud. I watched him drive away, and, for the first time since the divorce, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt powerful. I had something that money couldn't buy, and that a man in a suit could never understand. I had a home. That night, my new cheap phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me press the green button. Clara. The voice was instantly recognizable. Mark. My stomach twisted into a familiar, sick knot. What do you want, Mark? I heard a rumor that you were back in that dead-end town you came from. I was worried. He was never worried. He was scouting. I'm fine, I said, my voice flat. Listen, I know things were messy, he said, his voice oozing that practiced, insincere charm that had once fooled me so completely. But you don't have to do this. You don't have to run away and hide in some hovel. Some of my father's business associates mentioned a holdout on a development project out there. A stubborn woman on a worthless piece of land. I put two and two together. Clara, don't be foolish. Sell it. Take the money. You need it. And there it was. He was working with them. Or his father was. It was all part of the same machine. The same system that had chewed me up and spit me out. They wanted to erase this last little piece of me, too. To swallow it whole and pave it over. It's not for sale, Mark, I said. He sighed, a sound of put-upon frustration. Why are you being so difficult? It's a shack, Clara. It's nothing. You're choosing nothing over a fresh start. I looked around the little space, lit by the warm glow of my lantern. I saw the tools on the wall, the jacket on its peg, the metal box sitting on the workbench. You're wrong, I said, and the certainty in my own voice surprised me. It's not nothing. It's everything you forgot to take. I hung up the phone before he could reply. I blocked his number, and then I sat in the quiet dark and I made a choice. I wasn't just going to hide here. I was going to build. The choice was one thing. The consequences, the reality of it, were another. The $17,000 was a buffer, a miracle, but it wasn't infinite. I knew I had to make it last. The first consequence of my decision was work. Hard, grinding, unglamorous work. I started by making the shed livable. I used a portion of the money to buy lumber, insulation, and a small wood-burning stove from the local hardware store. The owner, a grizzled old man named Gus, remembered my father well. Dan Miller bought every nail he ever hammered from this store, he told me, leaning on the counter. He knew his stuff. Taught you anything? Not enough, I admitted. Well, he said with a wry smile, you're about to get a crash course. He was right. I learned how to frame a wall, how to install insulation without getting it all over me, how to run a stovepipe through a roof without burning the whole place down. I watched countless hours of instructional videos on my phone at night. My data plan screaming for mercy. There were mistakes. I cut boards too short. I hit my thumb with a hammer more times than I could count. I spent one entire afternoon trying to fix a leak I had created in the roof, sitting in the pouring rain, soaked and miserable and crying with frustration. But I didn't stop. Every small victory, a window that sealed properly, a floorboard that didn't creak, a door that hung straight, felt like a monumental achievement. I was rebuilding the shed, but I was also rebuilding myself, nail by painful nail. I met more of the community. Brenda, at the diner, started saving me the day-old muffins. Earl, the taxi driver, would drop off a newspaper for me at the end of the road sometimes. Gus at the hardware store let me run a small tab and gave me advice that was worth more than any tool I bought. They were small gestures, tiny threads of connection, but they began to weave a safety net around me that I hadn't realized I needed. They didn't ask a lot of questions. They had seen Hale's black SUV come and go. They knew what a development company moving into a small town meant. In my stubborn refusal to sell, I think they saw a reflection of their own quiet, tenacious hold on their way of life. I wasn't just some outsider. I was Dan Miller's girl, and I was staying put. The money was still dwindling. I needed a job. I started taking on odd jobs in town, mucking out stalls at a nearby horse farm, waitressing a few nights a week at the diner, helping Gus stock shelves at the hardware store. It was humbling work. Just a year before, I had been the wife of a successful junior executive, attending cocktail parties and charity dinners. Now, I was scrubbing floors and smelling like horse manure at the end of the day. But there was an honesty to it that had been missing from my old life. I would come home to my little shed, bone-tired but with cash in my pocket that I had earned. I would light a fire in the stove, make a simple dinner, and feel a sense of peace that no amount of money or status had ever given me. The letters from Mark's lawyers kept coming, forwarded from a P.O. box I'd set up. They were about the debt. The credit cards he'd maxed out in my name, the personal loan he'd co-signed and then defaulted on, leaving me holding the bag. It was a mountain of paper, a constant, ugly reminder of his betrayal. For a while, I just let them pile up, unopened. They were a monster I was too scared to face. But one night, after a particularly grueling shift at the diner, I knew I couldn't ignore them anymore. I laid them all out on my small, handmade table. I took a deep breath, opened the last letter my father had written, the one dated just a month before he died. "Clara," it said, "this is the last one. I don't feel so good these days. I am tired, but I'm not worried about you anymore. Not really. I think a person's real inheritance isn't money or land. It's the strength that gets passed down. It's the knowledge that you can stand on your own 2 feet, even when the ground is shaking. You have that in you. I know you do. You're a Miller. We're not fancy, and we're not smart about money, but we are stubborn. We know how to hold on. Whatever mess you're in when you read this, don't let it scare you. You just face it. You look it right in the eye, and you tell it you're not moving. The mess will blink first. I promise." I called Ms. Albright the next day. I told her everything. About the shed, the letters, the money, the development company, the debt. She was silent for a long time on the other end of the line. "Your father," she finally said, her voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. He was a hell of a man. She agreed to help me. We used a portion of the money as a retainer. She started negotiating with the creditors, arguing that the debts were incurred fraudulently by my ex-husband. It was a long, slow, ugly fight. It involved depositions and affidavits and endless paperwork. Mark fought back, of course. His father's lawyers tried to paint me as a bitter, vindictive ex-wife, a liar, a gold digger. They tried to subpoena information about my mysterious inheritance, hoping to get their hands on it. But the shed, the land, it was all protected. It was mine before him. It was untouchable. It was my fortress. The fight with the developers was quieter, a war of attrition. They started clearing the land around me, the sound of chainsaws and heavy machinery, a constant roar during the day. My little clearing became an island in a sea of mud and upturned earth. They offered me more money, 10,000, then 15. Every time, I said no. My refusal was becoming a local legend. I was the crazy woman in the shed, the thorn in the side of the big city corporation. But I wasn't crazy. I was home. Slowly, painfully, things started to turn. One of the credit card companies, faced with Ms. Albright's meticulous documentation of Mark's spending, agreed to settle, forgiving the majority of the debt. It was the first crack in the dam. Then another followed. The legal battle wasn't over, but for the first time, it felt winnable. And in Callaway, something else was happening. People started stopping by. Not just Earl or Gus, but other folks. A woman dropped off a box of fresh vegetables from her garden. A retired carpenter came by and spent an afternoon helping me build proper steps for the front door, refusing any payment. They were checking on me, making sure the developers weren't harassing me, making sure I was okay. They were closing ranks. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was theirs, too. I had inherited more than just a piece of land from my father. I had inherited a community. It's been 2 years now since I first pushed my way through the tall grass and found this place. The shed isn't a shed anymore. It's a cabin, a tiny, sturdy, warm home. I have a small solar panel on the roof for electricity and a well for water. I have a garden out back where I grow my own vegetables. The development company eventually built their houses, but they had to build around me. My little 3/4-acre plot is a pocket of green and wildness in a neat grid of manicured lawns and identical houses. The new people who live there sometimes stare as they walk their dogs past my fence. I don't mind. Let them stare. I never became rich. The legal fees ate up the rest of my father's money, and then some. I still work at the diner, and I do freelance carpentry work on the side now. Life is not easy. It's a daily struggle, but it is mine. Every splinter in my hand, every dollar I earn, every vegetable I pull from the ground, it belongs to me. Mark took the life we built together, but it was a life built on his terms, on his foundation. He never knew that my father had already given me my own. An inheritance isn't always something you get when someone dies. Sometimes it's something that was waiting for you all along. A hidden strength, a forgotten piece of yourself, a story that was yours from the very beginning. My father was a quiet man. I spent most of my life misunderstanding that quietness as a lack of something. A lack of ambition, a lack of passion, a lack of words. But I was wrong. It wasn't an absence. It was a presence. It was the quiet of the deep woods, the quiet of the bedrock under the soil. It was a quiet strength that didn't need to announce itself. He didn't need to tell me he loved me. He built me a shelter against the storm. He gave me back my name. He gave me a place to stand. What more could any daughter ask for? Home, I've learned, is not four walls and a roof. It's not furniture or a bank account. It is the place where you're no longer a guest in your own life. It is the place you can be unapologetically, messily, stubbornly yourself. It might be a falling down shed in the middle of nowhere. It might be a relationship you nurture, or a skill you master, or a community you build. It is the ground you claim, the foundation you lay, the life you build with your own two hands. He took everything he thought was valuable. But the real treasure, the real inheritance, was hidden in a rusty box, buried under the floor of a forgotten shed, in the one place he never thought to look. So I want to leave you with this. What's the inheritance that has shaped you? Not the one in a will, not the money or the property, but the real one. The strength, the stubbornness, the story that was passed down to you. What is the wagon shed in your life? The seemingly worthless thing that turned out to be your salvation? Share it in the comments below. I'll be reading everyone because these are the stories that matter. These are the stories that remind us that even when we feel like we've lost everything, the most important parts of us are often just hidden, waiting for us to come home and dig them up. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for being a part of this community. Don't forget to subscribe, because there are so many more stories of survival and strength to share, and we're going to share them together.